We have J. Philip Mudd, Associate Executive Assistant Director, National Security Branch, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Mr. Mudd, thanks for being here again, and we welcome your testimony now. Are you going to yield to Mr. Liepman based on age or lack of hair? Okay. On the top of his head, I mean. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, let me just now introduce. You can rebut if you'd like, Mr. Liepman. Andrew Liepman is the Deputy Director for Intelligence of the National Counterterrorism Center. For those who don't know, the NCTC, as we call it, was created as part of the 9/11 reforms, post-9/11 reforms recommended by the 9/11 Commission. It is the central place, along with the creation of the Director of National Intelligence, but this is really the place where all of America's intelligence and intelligence-related agencies are working together 24/7 to share information, to raise information, and to make sure that the dots are connected in a way that they were not before 9/11. And therefore we were not able to prevent that tragic event. So with that, Mr. Liepman, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Lieberman, Ranking Member Collins. We welcome the opportunity to appear before you today to share our perspectives on the radicalization of Somali youth in America. And I do appreciate the opportunity to appear beside my longtime colleague, Mr. Mudd from the Bureau. I'll focus on what factors contribute to the radicalization and some of the particular vulnerabilities of the Somali American community. I will defer to Mr. Mudd to talk about the FBI activities. Let me start with a bit of context, very brief history of events in Somalia. The turmoil and the instability in Somalia dates back to the collapse of the government there in 1991. Resulted in a descent into factional fighting and anarchy. In 2006, following multiple failed attempts to bring stability, a loose coalition of clerics, local leaders, and militias, known as the Council of Islamic Courts, took power in much of Somalia. The Somali transitional federal government joined with the Ethiopian forces and routed the Islamic Court militias in a 2-week war. It's an important milestone. It also represents an important rallying point for Somalis, both in Somalia and in the diaspora. Since the end of 2006, Alshabaab, the militant wing of the council, has led a collection of clan militias in violent insurgency using guerrilla warfare and terrorist tactics against the transitional government and against the Ethiopian presence in the region. Just to give you some sense of the Somali American diaspora, they began arriving in the United States in significant numbers in 1992. Following the U.S. intervention in Somalia's humanitarian crisis, the Somali American population is distributed in clusters throughout the U.S. with the heaviest concentrations in Minneapolis, Columbus, Seattle, and San Diego. There are a variety of estimates of the size of the Somali American population. It's a fairly difficult number to give you with some precision. I think generally we accept the range from about 70,000 to as many as 200,000. And despite significant efforts to facilitate their settlement into American communities, many Somali immigrants face isolation. The adjustment to American society has reinforced their greater insularity compared to other more integrated recent immigrant communities and has aggravated the challenges of assimilation for their children. One of the main reasons that Mr. Mudd and I are here today, obviously, is the concern we have over the travel by some tens of Somali American young men back to Somalia, some of whom have trained and fought with the Al-Shabaab. The involvement of this foreign terrorist organization, the Shabaab, means we can't simply categorize this as homegrown violence. We are concerned that if a few Somali American youth can be motivated to engage in such activities overseas, fellow travelers could return to the U.S. and engage in terrorist activities here. Let me stress, we don't have a body of reporting that indicates U.S. persons who have traveled to Somalia are planning to execute attacks in the United States. We don't have that credible reporting. But we do worry that there is a potential that these individuals could be indoctrinated by al-Qaeda while they're in Somalia and then return to the United States with the intention to conduct attacks. They would, in fact, provide al-Qaeda with trained extremists inside the United States. So one of the main questions that we try and answer is what causes the radicalization of a small but significant number of Somali American youth? The answer is complex. It's the result of a number of factors that come together when a dynamic, influential, and extremist leader gains access to a despondent and disenfranchised group of young men. Sophisticated extremist recruiters target these individuals who lack structure and definition in their lives. The recruiters subject them to religiously inspired doctrination to move them towards violent extremism. They target vulnerable young men, many of them refugees who came here as small children or who are the children of immigrants, who are torn between their parents' traditional ethnic, tribal, and clan identities and the new cultures and traditions offered by American society. Among Somali Americans, the refugee experience of fleeing a war-torn country combined with isolation, perceived discrimination, marginalization, and frustrated expectations, as well as local criminal, familial, and clan dynamics, make some members of this community more susceptible to this sort of extremist influence. And let me stress, just as you said, Mr. Chairman, we are not witnessing a community-wide radicalization among Somali Americans. When I speak of the Somali American community, I don't mean to generalize. Rather, I'm describing a problem limited to a small fraction of the community, most of which came to America to get away from violence, not to commit it. The overwhelming majority of Somali Americans is or wants to be a contributing member of American society, trying to raise their families here and desperately wishing for stability in their ancestral homeland. But as I said, the Somali community is in some respects more susceptible to the influence of extremist elements, a number of factors that have mitigated radicalization among other ethnic, religious American communities are less evident in the Somali community here. These include some level of faith in the American political system, access to resources to defend civil rights and civil liberties, and interaction with non-Muslims, and a greater focus on domestic rather than international events. You asked about the role that the Internet plays in radicalizing Somali youth. It's not an easy metric for us to measure. It is clear, though, that access to the Internet and to such material on the Internet alone is rarely enough to cause an individual to become radical himself. It is also clear, though, that the Somali American youth who have traveled abroad to join and fight for Al-Shabaab were exposed to Al-Shabaab's extremist ideology here in the United States, both in terms of face-to-face contact with extremist elements and on the Internet, and they tended to reinforce each other. The easy availability of extremist media on the Internet provides a range of themes that extremist recruiters can use to appeal to disenfranchised young men. As you mentioned, al-Qaeda senior leadership in recent months have weighed in with their own support for Shabaab, praising it and depicting Somalia as a local manifestation of the broader conflict between the West and Islam. I should note that this al-Qaeda stamp of approval does not guarantee either greater success or enhanced impact. In fact, it could backfire. Many potential ethnic Somali recruits would prefer to join a group that is focused explicitly on Somali issues rather than signing up for the global jihad and joining an al-Qaeda affiliate. Let me end with a couple of comments on NCTC's role in this process and refer to your reference to this being a turning point, the 5th year of the anniversary of the Madrid attack. And indeed, it is a turning point in many respects. I think 2004, if we remember back, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence didn't yet exist. NCTC was in its infancy. It was then called the Terrorist Threat Integration Center. And I'd like to think that the community has come a long ways since then. In fact, Somalia represents a great example of the type of challenge that I think NCTC can assist in. It's the intersection between a foreign problem that parts of our community study in Somalia and a homegrown problem that our domestic organizations are focused on. And we in NCTC are trying to bridge those two communities, and I'd like to think helping in that effort.